So, let me read. Actually, before I read, just a quick outline of where we are actually going. Where are we going? We're going to begin by looking at some of our context and some of the issues facing our local churches. We're going to explore some common approaches that we see of growing church and ministry. We're going to explore what pioneering is, or some ideas of what pioneering is. It may not be all the ideas. We're going to look at some examples. We're going to encourage some imagination. And we're going to look at some first steps. Now, we're not going to do a detailed, in-depth how you're going to go out and pioneer. So don't expect that you're going to go away from today with some great idea and all the steps that you're going to do. That's just a much bigger conversation. But hopefully today will bring about some imagination, widening some ideas, and hopefully giving you the next step of where you can go. So do let me know if you've got any questions as we go. I know for some of the terms that might be used might be new. Some of the concepts might be quite challenging, and you might have some questions. So just raise your hand and let me know if you've got any questions. We're clear? Any questions? Right. Now, if you'd read my blurb in the advertising, which I don't know if it actually got put up on the website. For those who didn't see it, because it possibly wasn't put up, I described this workshop as the following. First, I started off with a quote. "We follow a God who in Jesus broke out of heaven to be with us. We then see throughout the Bible his people breaking out so that others might discover this loving God. And this pattern continues through church history, and God's call to break out continues today. The church is breaking out in many new places, not asking people to come to church, but taking church to them. It is breaking out in new places and in new ways. And maybe God wants you to be a part of this." So that was a quote by a guy called Dave Mayo. And I met Dave over in the UK last year when I visited London. He's part of the Church of England and the National Director for Discipleship and Evangelism. So he's done some work on pioneering. Got a great little book, which I might refer to a couple of times. And in the back of your notes, there's actually a list of resources. And I've got that book listed right at the bottom. You can find it on Amazon for about $10. It's a great read if you're beginning in this area and want to know where to go. So just to let you know, that's there. So pioneering is a vital part of our Christian heritage. And we don't have to look too far back through history of church to actually start seeing pioneers at work in all sorts of ways. And hopefully as we go through this workshop, we're going to explore how in our changing culture and our context that we're involved in, that we do require some new and creative expressions of church and ministry to reach people that are beyond our current spheres of influence. I think we're all very aware that in church and in our ministries, we somehow manage to reach some people. But as we look out across our whole community, we're quite aware that that reach is very limited. And so how do we go about reaching all those people that are out there in our communities, in our neighbourhoods, that have no idea what church is about, who don't know don't want to know about Jesus, and often are quite lost. They have some big issues that they're dealing with in life, and sometimes we have the answers. But how do we reach them? Let me start with some stories. I know I've got some stories. Whoop, there we go, because it says stories. There we go. Story number 1. Jill has a 7-year-old child who attends a local primary school near her house. She looks forward to the brief moments each day when she chats with other parents at the school gate. Some have even become great friends. In a busy day is an oasis of normality for Jill. These people know that she goes to the local church. Sometimes Jill wonders if these parents would ever come to her local church. She loves the church, but sometimes it seems so culturally different to where they're at in their lives. And many of them are so busy on a Sunday with football and swimming and shopping. What can she do? Story number 2. James runs an under-14s local football team. He's been the manager for the last 7 years and he's got to know the parents quite well. They are essential for transporting the team and providing hot drinks on match days. And sometimes James feels really guilty that he does this on a Sunday when he and others should be at church. And he's talked to his vicar about how conflicted this makes him feel. And he would be delighted if some of the players, and maybe even their families, might come to church. But they're busy with football. What can he do? Story number 3. Michael works in a factory. He's worked there most of his life. Many of his co-workers have become close friends over the years. He's also a church warden at the local church. Often he feels that these two are very separate worlds that never meet. Yet he would love to see some of his friends connect with Jesus. They sometimes have spiritual discussions, sometimes about ghosts, or life after death, or suffering. But he wonders what else he could do for them. The last story. Juliet hosts a support group each month for families who have lost a young child. She herself lost her daughter during childbirth only 3 years ago. She was desperate, and then she discovered a support group. It was the group and her faith that got her through a very dark time. Often the group ends up discussing spiritual questions. Where is God in all this? Juliet wishes she knew of a church that she could take some of these people to. If only it could help them to process the deep questions that they are grappling with. But she feels that too quickly her church wants to give the right answers and leaves no space for doubt or questions. What can she do? Now, these are stories of real people grappling with some real questions, and I'm sure some of us have probably been grappling with similar sort of questions. How do we reach those that we're connected with in our neighbourhoods and communities and workplaces? With church, with faith. What can we do? And so hopefully some of this begins to step into that place. Hopefully we might get some answers as we journey. I guess in many ways the reality is that the church fails to meet the mission that is before us. We fail to connect in a lot of ways and we miss so many people. Now I want to start with looking at some culture. This is quite a foundational thing. It's sort of some background, I guess, before we go forward. To go forward, we often need to look from where we have come from. And in many ways, our current traditional parish-based system of church was established for a very specific strategic approach to mission in a very different cultural context. Parish-based ministry was a mission strategy, and it was extremely successful. We look at places like the UK, even here in New Zealand, as communities grew, as new towns were planted, churches were planted. Missionary pioneers and priests were ordained to go out and plant churches and to form a parish. And so it was very missional. But over the years, we've lost a lot of that mission initiative. We sort of lost new towns to a lot. We don't need to keep planting churches because the churches are already planted. And so we stopped sending people out. And we lost that missional imperative that is part of our faith and part of Christianity. We lost the ability to train people to go out into communities and to contextualise, to listen to the stories and to come alongside people, learning what their needs are and be able to work out where the gospel connects with where they're at as a community. And so I guess for the parish-based system, it's worked well. It's got some really good values. It's succeeded in a wonderful way. But we somehow need to move past that into something else so we keep going out. Much of our parish-based system was established in a time which could be called Christendom, when the church was very much at the centre of society and of the worldview for most people, especially in the West, the Western world. And so in each community, the church was the centre. You had births, baptisms, weddings, funerals, and everybody gathered together for those events. And the church was very much the centre of a lot that happened. The church also tended to have a large voice in what was happening in the community. Sometimes too much. Sometimes they made a few silly decisions. But that's just part of the history. But that is part of Christendom, where we've come from. We're now in a place where a lot of people would say post-Christendom, where we're sort of past that place where a Christian worldview is no longer central to everybody's worldview. A lot of people come with all sorts of ideas. We're a pluralistic society, lots of ideas. I didn't do that. Don't know how it did that, but anyway, we'll get that sorted in a moment. So, pluralistic society with a whole lot of ideas out there. We've got a whole lot of different cultures that are clashing together. And in amongst that, we've got so many different ideas, so many different values, so many different ways of communicating, so many different priorities. And the church is left scrambling. How do we connect? The old ways of doing, which so much of what we do is based on, just don't work for this new place that we find ourselves. So it's good to recognise where we've come from and where we currently find ourselves. So, I want to look at 5 shifts in culture. The first one, our changing Sundays. These are shifts that really affect the church. So changing Sundays. Once upon a time, Sunday was church day. It was a day that the whole community pretty much went to church. And slowly then less and less people went to church. But now, it's not just that people aren't going to church, it's that there's a whole lot of other stuff that are taking place on a Sunday. Your sports, often for many families, it's the only day off that they have, working on Saturdays, so Sunday becomes a family day. Shops are open on Sundays, people go do their shopping because they're busy during the week. And so now we're contending with a whole lot of other things that are happening on a Sunday, which traditionally was church day, for better or worse. So, that is Sunday. Right, second shift. Changing relationships. Now, I mentioned that we're in this clash of cultures, of variety. And I guess we're talking here cultures that come from all across the world. We don't have to look far before we start experiencing cultures from all around the world, especially when it comes to food. We're very aware of all the extra food options we have available. You know, our Thai and our Chinese and our Japanese, and some good options there. But it's not just that, it's the people as well. And so we're connecting in relationship with people that are coming from completely different cultural backgrounds to our own. Once upon a time, everyone had the same cultural background. When they're in their communities, often very little travel away. And even when there was a bit of travel away, you're usually in the same nation to some extent, there was a cultural understanding that everybody carried together. Whereas now, we're bombarded with vast cultural differences. And we don't always understand where people are coming from. And we don't understand as a church how we can connect with those people who are coming from a very different cultural background. In many ways, we need to become missionaries, cross-cultural missionaries. Now, just want to take a break from me talking for a moment and get you coming up with some ideas. What are some of the groups of people, if we think of groups of people in our communities, that we are connected with? So, So what are some of the groups of people that were, so just think,
Do you mean like schools?
schools, work, yep. School,
B club.
work, what was the club?
B club.
B club. I'm going to put clubs, and otherwise I could be going for ages labelling all the clubs.
Business.
Buzz, honeybee club, yes.
Businesses.
Business, we'll go with work for that. Is that, sum up that? Yep. Marae. Sport. Neighbours, yes.
Cultural groups like singing and art.
Cultural groups, yep.
Social media.
Ooh.
Who said that?
Seasonal work.
Yes.
Newcomers.
Seasonal workers, very much a different culture that we're embracing here in Marlborough. What was that last one?
Newcomers.
Newcomers from a variety of places, yep.
Schools. Oh, you got
At school, yep.
Tourists.
Tourists, yes.
How about the simplicity of ages?
Ages, as in,
As in a teenager versus an 8-year-old?
yep. Put ages there.
refugees.
Ages and stages of life, how's that? Refugees.
Family.
Family. Yeah. Well, I'm going to put religious groups, whether that's Christian or non-Christian or other religion of whatever. Yep. What else?
Political parties.
Political parties, yeah.
Religion interacting with politics.
Tricky territory there.
Right, one more to finish it off.
Business.
Business, work business. That's for,
Business could be different.
okay. Well,
Yeah, like shopping malls and the way
oh, yeah.
your date is. Yeah.
Yep.
Suppliers. Cafes.
Suppliers, shopping, etc. Right, we've got some ideas there. We're going to come back to that a little later. Just getting you doing some work right now. Right. Okay. So just starting to identify some of the different groups that we have out there that we're relating to in all sorts of different ways. Shift number 3, changing cultures. We've sort of spoken a little bit about that. But we also start seeing all sorts of subcultures around us. So we get the different ethnic cultures, even here in Blenheim with the seasonal workers and refugees. But we've got subcultures that we might see around the place, like the guys down at the skater park. You've got that skater subculture, or your art people who go along to all the art films or spend their time travelling around all the different art galleries. You know, those little subcultures that exist of groups of people. Yep, that makes sense? Yep. Right. So, exercise number 2. Some of those subcultures. What have we got?
Cafes.
Cafe culture. Yep.
Isn't church a subculture?
Church, yes. So some of them may relate up here, but some of them could be quite different as well.
You've got your Maori cultural groups.
Cultural groups, shall I?
Unemployed.
Yep.
Homeless.
Homeless. Gangs, yes.
Blended families.
Blended families.
Gender differences.
Yep. Yep. Pubs. Pub culture, yes.
Gym bunnies.
Party culture. Gym culture. Right, does that start giving us an idea? Yep.
Oh, and we're just looking for your slides again.
Did I put the finger on the button that time? Haha, back to 3. And we just did that. Cool. Right. Which brings us to number 4. Less faith knowledge. Once upon a time, the church was largely working with a group of people which were, if not brought up in the church, at least had a very strong understanding of church and Christianity, because it was the way of the world for much of the Western world. So thinking New Zealand, UK, a lot of those places, church and Christianity was at the foundation of society and part of the legal system, part of the values that people held. Whereas, was that?
Part of school.
Part of the schooling and the school system, absolutely. So it was just, Christianity was very much a part of the culture, and people understood the Christian story and the gospel. May not have known it completely, there may have been big gaps there, but they understood the basics. They knew who Jesus was, to some extent. They may not have had a relationship, but they knew the stories. And so when it comes to sharing faith, there was this foundation that was already laid. Whereas now, there's less faith knowledge. People don't understand or know much about Christianity in many places. In fact, Faith and Belief, a survey which came out, I think it was 2019, here in New Zealand. So these are stats from New Zealand. 30% say they are Christian in New Zealand. Only 16% go to church though. That means there's about 15% that don't go to church but say they're a Christian. Then you've got 30% or 35% that have no religious or spiritual belief. 20% say they're spiritual but not religious. And 12% are other religions. And so you've got this large part of our country that don't necessarily know much about Jesus or Christianity or church. In fact, when they were asked how much do Kiwis know about Jesus and his life, 32% said little or nothing. 28%, I know a bit. 39% said a significant amount. So there's definitely some space there to recognise that a large number of the people out there in our communities won't know anything when we say, do you know about Jesus? That assumption that was there for the church is no longer there. We can't assume that people know what we're talking about. And so that also means as people come through our doors to explore church, we can't assume that they know what they're about to encounter. Make some interesting questions when you're running a service and you see a new person come through the door. I wonder what they know. Am I making sense? But yeah, right, shift number 5. A shift from religion to spirituality. Where'd it go? There we go. Looking at that same survey. So this is a shift from religion to spirituality. 31% consider themselves a Christian. What was I going to say? But if we look down, what was it? Can't remember where I got that from, but effectively 1 in 5 New Zealanders will say that they're spiritual, but not religious. I think I might actually have the wrong
So it depends
thing
on
up there.
how the question was phased though, doesn't it?
It does to some extent, yeah.
What the question said.
Yeah.
that could be quite misleading, really. It's not,
The group
I
that
don't know who did the,
Yeah,
who did the questions.
it was done in conjunction with Barna Research. Barna Research is quite a well-known Christian organisation based in the States, but doing a whole lot of worldwide research. And was it with World Vision? Yeah.
Wilberforce.
No, Wilberforce. So, yeah, as you're right, surveys can always be a little bit misleading and you got some interpretation to do with the results. But I think the organisation behind this is well experienced in what they're doing.
And I just wonder
But yeah,
how you define spirituality in that.
yeah. Did I put it
Something that I could find on
on the resources?
probably. I could probably
I'm pretty sure it's under resources. I listed the website, faithandbeliefnz.org or something like that, where you can actually read the full report of this. So if any of this is of interest to you, check out that report. It's got some fascinating implications in there. Worth talking to your vestries about too. So, but 1 in 5 New Zealanders saying that they're spiritual, but not religious. So they don't have a religion that they're part of, but they're spiritual in some way. They've got this awareness that there's a spiritual part of life. They may not fully understand what that is, but they're open spiritually, but against religion. And so you've got this move that's taking place in society away from religious organisations, but people are still saying they're spiritual. So just another shift to be aware of that's happening out there in our community.
I was just going to say, with that word spirituality and the shift and everything else, you'll find that kind of like my generation down, they have like a generic understanding of what spirituality is. So when it comes to definitions and you'll say that, it could be that I believe that the rock's going to give me faith. It's going to say there is a generalised feeling and understanding of spirituality in the generations that are generally younger than the Anglican Church.
Yeah. So, and that also comes back to this ages and stages as well.
Yeah.
They will interpret different parts of culture in different ways, which is worth being aware of. So those were just some of the shifts that we're facing with the church at the moment. And so it brings up, makes it very, puts it very much in front of us that we need to somehow cut across those cultural differences that are becoming so abundant and work out how we can connect. And so, again, we're coming back to this idea of becoming cross-cultural missionaries, which once upon a time, when we talked about cross-cultural missionary in the church, we were talking about going overseas to a different culture. Whereas now, we're talking about that in our own country. We need to take on board some of what the overseas missionaries learnt and how they approached new cultures in their listening. And we need to do that in our own context. And so within this, by seeing just the vast variety that we've named here of different relationship groups, different cultures that we've got around us, we can start seeing that one approach to church and ministry is not going to be reaching everybody. And I don't expect us to necessarily be able to reach everybody, but surely we can be reaching more than what we are currently reaching. And so we need to start diversifying in what we're doing, come up with some new ideas. And that's sort of where we're heading. Any questions so far? No? All good? So I guess we're looking at a paradigm shift for the church to really understand that it's not just about reaching people where they are. It's fundamentally about allowing expressions of church and ministry and Christian community to take form and shape out there where they're at, and not actually necessarily expect them to come back to where we're at. That's a big shift. We'll come back to that a couple of times, or actually we'll look at that now, a bit more. Right, variety is the key. Nothing else today, variety is the key. So if you're offering a Sunday service, even 2 Sunday services, they're probably both very similar, even if one's at 8 o'clock and one's at 10 o'clock. Slightly different, but they're pretty much, you sit there and you listen to the guy up the front or the lady up the front or whoever's standing up the front. Very similar. Not much variety in it. So let's get a greater variety. I just read that, paradigm shift. Right, 3 methods of ministry and church growth. 3 common methods when we talk about this. The first one is attractional church, or inherited, often it's referred to as well, because tend to be that most inherited churches, such as the Anglican system, tend to be very attractional in the way that they operate. Come to us. We'll open up our doors. You come to us. We try to attract people in. We're going to run a group which might interest you. Come to us and attend this group. We're going to run a program for the children. Here, come to us. This program is for you and your family. And so it's very attractional based. And it works for some people. For some people. Some people will never come through the church doors for a variety of reasons. And so if we're stuck in an attractional model, then we're automatically excluding anyone who won't come into a church building. It doesn't mean they don't want to know about Jesus. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be part of a Christian community. They don't want to go to a church building. And there's a variety of reasons that could be for. But attractional has worked. It does still work. A lot of church planting models are based on an attractional method. We're going to put on a great service. We're going to have a great worship band. And sometimes the churches just fill up. It works. And in the UK, that's quite a main model that is being used. Most of you will be aware of the Alpha Course and Holy Trinity Brompton. They're using a church plant model where they plant a church with probably 60 to 100 odd people. That's the church plant team, 60 to 100 people. And they have a worship band and they have a minister and they form a whole new church or revitalise an old church, and it's a come to us. And it works. They're growing in huge ways by doing this. So it does work, has its value. Now at the other end of that, we've got the engaged or incarnational, the emerging incarnational. I put that in the wrong space. That word there should be up there. Right, so emerging and incarnational. In this model, some people will go into a new culture, a new part of the community. They might cross over the railway tracks and they'll go and they'll listen and they'll stay. They will engage in that culture, that community. They will listen to their stories and they'll work out how can we bring ministry or church or Christian community to these people. And it's not about going out and bringing them back. It's about going out and actually saying, we're going to stay here. We're going to journey with you. We're going to take you where you're at and we're going to work with you to provide Christian community and new ways of doing church. And that works as well. It requires being open to hearing their stories, to understanding where they're coming from, to understand that the ways that we might want to communicate the gospel may not actually be appropriate for that group. And you need to contextualise, make it appropriate for that situation. Some people call this incarnational. This idea of going and being Jesus in amongst that community. Have you heard that word before, incarnational? No? A new word? Right, let me define incarnational. Ultimately, we see Jesus as being the incarnational one. He came from heaven to earth. He fully embodied humanity and was incarnate. And so the idea of going out and being incarnational in ministry is to embody in a new place. So the passage from John 1:14 actually is often used in this. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. Often pioneers will use the Message translation for this verse. The Word became flesh and blood and moved into the neighbourhood. So incarnation was sort of being the hands and feet of Jesus. Taking what you believe and putting it into action in that place. You're living it out. Right. Last one there, the engaged method. Now, so the first one was attractional, very much a please come to us. The second one was very much go to them. The engaged method is a bit of both. It's going out, having some conversations, trying to work out where people are at, and then saying, well, how can we work with you? Can we do something for you in our church that's going to work and somehow embrace your community? So it's engaging with the community in partnership, doing something together. It's almost, we're going to go out, but then go back together. So that works as well. In some situations. Any questions around those models? Make sense? Yep. Right. Let's move on to the pioneering then. That's what you're really here for. As a church, we need to develop new ways of engaging with our communities. We've established that. And engaging with networks of people that are around us. We need to forge out of the comfortable and known and into the uncomfortable places and the unknown places within our communities. We need to do this to meet the vast majority of our community. Pioneering is about risk-taking, about being willing to be sent beyond the fringe of the church to advance the kingdom in new ways and creative ways. It's about following the incarnational example of Jesus. And sometimes, literally, and some people do this, move in to the neighbourhood. They'll pack up home and family and buy a house in that neighbourhood that they're feeling called to become part of that community. I'm not saying you need to do that to be a pioneer. Definitely not. But some people, that is the way to go. It's about following the incarnational example of Jesus, moving into the neighbourhood, sowing seeds of the gospel. And often those seeds of the gospel are through prophetic words and action, speaking into the situations of the neighbourhood prophetically, living out Jesus Christ in ways of reconciliation and love, helping with conflict. And so, for a variety of ways, you start building, what's the word? Having mind blank here. Relationship with the community through all those ways. Pioneering is about being willing to lovingly give time and energy and to nurture a Christian community that emerges wherever that emerges. Often there more than here. And we'll see lives that are transformed by a living God. Often these new communities of faith can look quite different to existing patterns of church as we see them. But we'll also see as we form Christian community that discipleship takes place and worship takes place. Maybe not as we know it or expect it to be, but often in ways that work for those people. So it's about going with an openness and a willingness to learn and a willingness to be able to adapt what we're taking to be appropriate for the context. When we were talking about pioneering, I'm sort of using it in quite a broad way. We can be thinking of church planting. We can be thinking of planting new ministries. We can be thinking of fresh expressions. Have you come across that term before, fresh expressions? Some yes, some no. Fresh expressions came out of the UK back probably around the turn of the century, late 90s, mid to late 90s, really with a group of churches experimenting in different ways of doing ministry amongst the community. And over a bit of time, as more and more of these groups started experimenting, they got together and formed Fresh Expressions, sort of a label for a type of pioneering. So you'll know of Messy Church is the big one. Messy Church. Most of you would have heard of that. That's a fresh expression. So an idea of gathering people together in some specific way and doing church with them. Not all fresh expressions will mature into what we would call church, but the idea is that is the intended outcome, that actually we're going to gather this group of people together and go on a journey, and our hope is that we'll form Christian community which becomes a worshipping community. Doesn't always happen. And one of the things we need to understand with pioneering is that actually a lot of the time there will be some failures. We're trying and experimenting with a variety of ways. Some experiments, some opportunities will work for a year or two. They might be extremely successful for a period of time, and then they might die away. And actually that's a success. There's a success in that. People have taken on a journey, they've grown in their understanding of what church is and what Christian fellowship is all about. And it may not have lasted, but that's okay. Maybe there's a next step or a new fresh expression or expression of church and community for them to then join. We can't see something that only lasts 2 or 3 years as a failure. Too often it's actually a success and we mislabel it. We've learnt in the process. And often with pioneering, there is limited time span in what these expressions are. We're not looking to establish churches that are going to last 2, 3, 4, 500 years. Often much shorter than that. But they're authentic. And they have real Christian community. They're often a success. And so we've just got to be aware of what failure means in this place and what success means. It can be quite different to what we might be thinking when we first start. Right. Got a video for us to watch. Dear oh dear. What's going on here? Aha. This is from the United States. It's, they've got Fresh Expressions in the United States as well, and they've got some really good online resources. So I've got a couple of videos to show you today just to get the imagination going of what pioneering and fresh expressions may look like. So let's have a look at this one.
Traditional church and traditional church needs to get over new forms of church.
Yeah. There was very much a partnership there, wasn't there, between the old and the new. And I think we really need to take hold of that as an Anglican church. I think that could be our strength, that we've actually got some really good established old that can partner with some new and work together to support each other. And it's not just about one supporting the other. Actually, that support will end up going both ways over time. They'll grow, they'll synergise, they'll learn from each other, they'll challenge each other, and we need that. So, as I said before at the beginning, it's not about saying the old's not working, let's do something completely different. It's actually saying we need to do something else to reach some other people, and together they can work together. So hopefully that also got some imagination juices flowing of what a pioneering experience could look like, or expression. We'll look at some more shortly. Let me...
Yeah, it was just having a wry reflection on old style church measures success in certain ways.
Yes.
Bums on seats. And the diocese charges the church for bums on seats, number of people communicated, number of people who go through baptism or whatever. All those measures organisationally may well have to be rethought, because sadly, what was powerful for me there was just that last piece around we are sharing responsibility for bringing more people into the community of God, not into this building, but into the community of God. And the traditional church will need to rethink how it measures and supports success and funds and that kind of thing.
There's some big organisational and structural things that have to happen around this to work with this, and Steve's very aware of it, aren't you, Steve? Yeah. And
I'm here.
last year...
Steve was there. Good you are.
We've already had some conversations about this, but actually last year I went over to the UK and Europe and spoke with some people around some of the stuff, but actually a lot of my conversations were around some of these structural changes that we have to look at. It wasn't necessarily around how you do pioneering or fresh expressions or new ways of doing church, but actually how does the established church make room for that to happen? Because there's some really big questions around this. You know, you start looking at our statutes, and sometimes some of the statutes put up some big walls against some of this other stuff. I won't go into too much detail, but there really is some big things, and Steve's aware of it, and he's working through some of it. The Church of England is really struggling with this, and I've been doing fresh expressions for 20 odd years, and they're still struggling at how these fresh expressions can find authenticity and representation in their diocese and, synod, those sort of things. So,
Can I make a comment here? It's trying to balance that interdependence between the traditional and the new fresh expressions. You've got to keep that in mind.
Yep.
But at the same time, you want to allow people to take risks and do something new. And yet there's expectation that we are a safe church. Just can't let people you see what I mean? Like you're trying to balance all those things. So there's pushback for people to say, well, we don't want all those rules and all those structures and all those requirements. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that what we provide for people, the spaces for fellowship, for engaging with God, is safe.
Yep.
So you've got to tick a couple of boxes.
Yes.
So it's not saying, throw away the structure and just let people loose. It's a case of saying, how do we provide all of that in an environment that enables us to be able to build God's people so they can flourish? And so I think there is a willingness to try new ideas. You just have to try and work through what that looks like.
Yeah.
That's the space where we're at.
I'm actually an interloper because I'm actually from next door.
Good to have you with us.
But I have one foot here in that I attend church at Waitaria Bay with Sue Howes down at our batch. And one of the things that would be nice to see moving forward is even that collaboration, because you mentioned Messy Church somewhere here. We actually have once a month Cruisy Church next door.
Yep.
And for a lot of the families that go there, most of them do not go to your traditional 10 o'clock. In fact, perhaps we've just had to rebuild it again. In fact, none of them, I think, go to. And the other thing is that, I'm not sure, no one of the other expressions that was started some years ago, it's now called Joy Ministry, or Joy Club, so we don't have to pay a franchise. And that meets once a month, and that's actually for all the IHC people.
Yep.
And in a year, it's been going for about 12 years, but in the last year it's grown from about 9 people coming to 23 coming. And your church is really supportive because we actually meet for fellowship and then we have a meal together. And the meal is provided by different churches around Blenheim. So there is an effort to collaborate. So when we're talking about new expression, perhaps sometimes we don't necessarily have to think about doing it on our own.
Yes, absolutely.
But seeing if we can team up somehow so that we're actually meeting different areas of the community and not all competing for the same area.
Yeah, absolutely. Partnership's key, in a variety of ways, different partnerships. But so I guess part of this going out and pioneering is not just coming up with a new way of doing church or ministry, it's also taking the steps to do it safely and to work within some of the structures that we've got. There's pioneering in that structural adjustment. And so, to some extent, this is new for the diocese. And there's going to be some big questions. There's going to be some difficult questions to grapple with. And so, it's not just pioneering a new expression, we're almost pioneering a whole lot of new stuff alongside that as well. So it can take time. Dave Mayle, who I mentioned at the beginning, has defined a pioneer as people called by God who are the first to see and to creatively respond to the Holy Spirit's initiatives with those outside the church, gathering others around them as they seek to establish new contextual community. Now, I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. It was right there. So that's on one of your slides there. But I thought it was a good quote just to sum up this idea of who pioneers are. Johnny Baker, another guy from the UK, works with CMS over there, and he's a pioneer trainer. And he says that pioneering is an extraordinary gift. People who are pioneers bring an amazing gift to the church. One of the ways I've come to think of it, he says, is as a gift of not fitting in. This is not to suggest for a moment that pioneers are the awkward squad. It is that they see and imagine different possibilities to the way things are now, to the business as usual. They are then able to build a pathway to make real what they see or imagine. So, what I want to do now, just very quickly, who are the pioneers that we see in Scripture? Paul, yes. Paul is very much a pioneer in many, many ways, and we see that through a lot of the New Testament Scripture and what pioneering looked like for Paul going into new places. We might even think of visiting Athens and how he contextualized the gospel to speak to the people of Athens. I see that you have an unknown God. Let me tell you about my God. Contextualized. What other pioneers do we see in Scripture? Susan?
Well, the ultimate pioneer is JC himself.
Jesus Christ, absolutely. And we even have that in Hebrews chapter 12. Jesus is described as the pioneer of our faith. In fact, pioneer is used twice in New Testament, both times referring to Jesus.
It all started one to one. He went and picked up Peter off a fishing wharf with his brother and got the accountant off his tax fees. One to one.
Yep.
Same with Paul. It was one to one.
A lot of one-to-one relationship stuff happening, absolutely.
But I also think of Moses. And taking his people and spending a lot of time because they didn't know God.
Yep.
Go back further,
Abraham, yes. And we know how far Abraham travelled.
Yeah.
If you've looked at a map, it's quite a considerable distance, especially back in those days, to uproot his family and go to a completely different place because God had told him to go. And that's really pioneering, isn't it? God's calling us to go into a new place. Any other people that come to mind? Nehemiah?
Back to rebuild.
Going back, pioneering by going back to a place that needed to be rebuilt. Rebuilding pioneer, yeah. Yep. I'm sure there's a few others that you could come up with if we keep dwelling on it. But you covered the couple that I picked out as well. So Abraham, Paul, been big ones. We see a lot of pioneering taking place throughout the book of Acts. Pioneer after pioneer after pioneers, Peter and Paul and Barnabas and, all sorts of names we can pull out, but we just see them in different ways, pioneering into different places and how God and the Spirit of God leads them. Or it sometimes even closes off places where they're wanting to go. Yeah. So there's definitely some good stuff there in Scripture to get some ideas for pioneering and how to step into it. Got another video for you. This one is from Wildwood in Florida, and Michael, who's the guy, the minister at the start, is someone I'm in a international pioneering conversation with. There's a group of us that came out of my sabbatical last year, so really enjoyed some of what Michael has had to say around pioneering and fresh expressions. He's doing a lot of teaching around this area and written some good books as well. But this is his church, which was a United Methodist church. So let's have a look. Some interesting ones there, aren't there? Church in a tattoo parlour. Getting tats. Church in Mexican restaurant. That's probably more doable, but yeah. It's just interesting, isn't it? Church at the dog park. The idea that they're working on here is that by gathering community together and going on a journey together with the whole intent of somehow within that forming disciples, that within that there is authentic church. May not look like church as we know it. It may not have all the elements that we might think we need in church. They might do it in different ways. But forming community and going on a journey. And if we look at pioneering like that, then it actually simplifies it a whole lot. It gives us a whole lot of possibilities and opportunities as we start connecting with the people around us, forming community and going on a journey together. Fresh expressions have four things they say you sort of need to be a fresh expression. First one is it needs to be missional. The idea is that it's going out and it's of the benefit of non-believers. You're not forming a new way of doing church or ministry for all the believers. The idea is that you're going out and you're reaching people who aren't already connected. So that's the first one. Second one is contextual. You don't go with your own ideas. You go and you listen to start with, and you work out where the people are at, and you make it work for them. Okay? So a 15-minute sermon or talk about scripture in a lot of contexts is too much. And so you saw even in that last video, just opening up with a short devotion before going on a walk together. That was the time of scripture. And then as they walk, they might talk together about that. There wasn't a huge amount of input required, and it was probably all that was needed for a lot of those people. But it was a starting point, and it worked. Formational. The idea is that it is somehow forming disciples. Both those who are leading, because you're being formed as a disciple as you're stepping out into new places, but also you're forming new disciples as you're taking people on a journey of faith. And the whole idea of discipleship is not necessarily that everybody will be a Christian, but discipleship is that journey from pre-Christian to become a Christian and then to grow as a Christian. And so when we think of discipleship, we actually need to go back further than what we sometimes think. The starting point is not when they've made a decision for Christ. The starting point for most people is a lot further back, when they're starting to hear the stories and starting to understand what church and Christianity and Jesus is about. Okay? Last one is ecclesial, which is a theological term. It intends to be church. So ecclesial is church. So ecclesiology is the study of the church. To be ecclesial is to be church. So it's authentically church, and it's recognised as church, as wacky as it might seem. It's not saying you're a home group because you meet in a home, but actually it's going beyond that and saying you're authentically a church in that place. And I think we've actually done ourselves some damage in our modern church by moving home groups and seeing them as something quite separate to church. Because often when we gather in our homes, we open up scripture. Sometimes we'll worship, we'll pray. Sometimes they'll even do communion together. All those elements take place on a Sunday. But we're saying that that's not church. Whereas actually, in this paradigm shift, there is nothing to say that those home groups aren't necessarily church. And therefore, start bringing people in from your neighbourhood to those groups and say, this is church. This is church for us. We're also part of another church, which we meet on Sundays are gathered, but this is us in this place also being church. So it's starting to play with some of the terminology and our understandings as well. So those are 4 points that they have of what a fresh expression of church is. Now, did I give you a copy of this in the back of your... Did I not?
Just a small one.
It must be sitting on my printer then. Sorry about that. If you look up, Google search, Pioneer Spectrum, you will find that, which is a great diagram when we start talking about pioneering. So, I wonder if my pointer's going to work. Ooh, there we go. Can you see that? So on this side we have pioneers that replicate. So we're sort of talking about different types of pioneering. Pioneers that replicate will see something that's working somewhere else and say, oh, that can work for us. A model or way of doing. And often traditional church plants, like I was talking about before of Holy Trinity Brompton, Alpha, that side of things, they're replicating a model that already works, but they're planting it somewhere new. It doesn't always take too much imagination, but it can be effective. Then we move on to pioneers who adapt. Pioneers who see something and think, oh, that's a good idea, but it's not going to work in my context. I've got to adapt it for the people I'm working with. So things like messy church, cafe church, we're adapting some ideas that we're already aware of and making it work for us. Then we've got the pioneers who venture out, getting a little bit further out, and we're saying, well, let's form community by ourselves. Let's maybe do missional community or monastic community. Some of the terms that might be used there. So venturing out a bit more to the fringe of our churches and beyond, starting to talk to some people in the community. Generally, those 3 there are what we would call fresh expressions. Those who adapt, those who venture out and connect with people in community. Right at the end here is another form of pioneering that they've identified. Community activism or social enterprise. Pioneers who go out into a secular space and they speak prophetically into those places. Often not with the intention of bringing church to those places, but by they're speaking Christian value and worldview and morals into places that are often dark. So they're bringing something of the kingdom into the world. They're pioneering in that way. And often out of that, some people will start on a journey to look for something more. So some people are called to that place. It really is outside of what we would probably call church and really gone out there. But we need those people to do that as well. So that's pioneering spectrum. And it's important to actually look at that, to understand that when we start talking about pioneers in the church, we're not just talking about one specific way of doing pioneering. We're actually talking about a whole spectrum of the way that pioneering can take place. And so one church might have someone they call a pioneer person. They're pioneering. We've got a pioneer in our church. And they could be, completely replicating something that's already happening. Another church down the road could be talking about, we've got a pioneer. And they're going out there, they've moved across the railway tracks. And they're really working with people that just don't come to church. And so they're both using the same term, but very different understandings around it. And I think we need to grapple with that and understand that early on in the process, that this term pioneer can be used in a broad sense in a multiple variety of ways. And so don't just assume you know what a group of people or a church or a person is talking about when they say I'm pioneering or we're pioneering. There's a whole raft of ideas there. Let's move on. We won't watch that because I think we're running short on time. And I'm sure you want to get home, have some dinner before coming out tonight to the next session. Now, whoa, what the heck is that, they say?
It's the test at the end.
This is a model, a variety of, I guess, fresh expressions that Michael Beck, who we watched in the last video, put together of his collection of churches and fresh expressions and engagements. And this is an updated one within the last couple of months because he's got a whole lot of YouTube and Zoom and Facebook on there. Because going into lockdown, they very much recognise that there's a whole lot of different ways of communicating and doing church with people. So you probably can't see it there, but we've got a nice church here, and we've got these things called a first place, and then there's a third place. And this is going to social community theory, or place theory, where we have spaces and places that people are involved in. So our first space would be our home where we live. Our second place is primarily our places of work or school for those who go to school. Our third places, which are really good for fresh expressions, like dinner church, are down at the cafe, where people gather together. Not at home, not at work, but we're going to gather together somewhere. Let's do it down at the cafe. So we've got a lot of fresh expressions that start happening or pioneering. It takes place in third places because they're safe. They're known to people. They're not, no one's needing to go into someone's private house. People aren't needing to go into a church building. But they're third places. And so they can become safe. So as I say, this is a model of what Michael's put together. But I wanted to show it to you how confusing this can get. When we start talking about multiple ways of pioneering, so we imagine our deanery. And if we imagine Nativity might, have maybe cafe church down there on a Wednesday, and St Christopher's has a market in their place which starts forming community. But actually at that market we get some people from Nativity go and help out as well. Things start blending together and getting quite mixed up. And some of these people who might meet at dinner church might never go to the main church building. But they might connect through YouTube or something else to some stuff that's happening. They might connect to another third place something. They might also go from dinner church to the Mexican restaurant. Woohoo! Or to the tattoo parlour. Or to a dog park. But so there's different connections. But what I'm saying is, as we look across our deanery in 5-10 years' time, if, say, all of our churches go out in the next 5-10 years and plant 5 fresh expressions or pioneering expressions of church, they're not necessarily going to be just connecting with just your parish. They may start connecting with other churches in different ways. So coming back to the partnership, working together. And it looks messy, and it can feel messy, and it can be messy to organise. And you start feeling for our people in reception who are fielding the phone calls saying, what's happening? And I'm like, I don't know. And we start thinking, well, how do we record those people on our church stats?
Do they get to vote?
Do they get to vote? Those sort of questions, it does become messy. And we've got to find ways through this, find ways of connecting. But at the heart of it is relationship and forming Christian community. And some of those hard questions can get put off, or we can work our way around them. But we've got to be forming Christian communities, communities of faith where people can journey. So in the last few minutes, I just want to quickly take you through a few steps of what that may look like. This is using the Fresh Expressions pathway. And as I've mentioned a few times before, the starting place is to listen. You might have an idea, which is good, but who's that with? What's the context? Who are the people God is calling you to do that with? Go and listen to those people. Have conversations. Take time. Don't just jump in. You've got to listen. Listen to their stories. Listen to where they've come from. Listen to their hurt and their pain. What are the things that they celebrate within their culture? Hear those things and learn. Talk to people as well. Who else might have taken a similar journey? Who else might be able to offer you some advice in that place? It's all part of that listening process. Next one is loving and serving. We don't automatically say in this process that we're necessarily going to go and just plant a church or a group and this is going to be it. Often it will start with going out into that place or space, meeting people and saying, how can I help? How can I love this community? How can I become part of it? How can I serve you? Maybe it's meals. Maybe it's a food bank. Maybe it's providing advice, doing a cooking class. How can you connect with that subculture that we're working with? Love and serve them. And as you do that, start building community. Those relationships between yourself and the other person or that group of people, but also forming community amongst that group. Sometimes they'll be coming from a variety of different places and they won't know each other. And other times you'll be going into a subculture that already exists and those relationships are already built. But make sure you're building community. And then we move on to this process of exploring discipleship. I'm from church. I believe in Jesus. Do you know about Jesus? Well, let me tell you a short story. Or maybe as we gather together, you know I'm from the church, and I just want to share for 5 minutes at the start of our time a short Bible story, just to get us thinking, and I'd be really keen to hear what your thoughts are. And so you start exploring together discipleship and the stories of Jesus. And as we begin to do that, and as people step towards Christ more and more, as they're asking more questions and thinking, oh, actually this could be for me, then we start to see different practices of church taking shape within that group. Maybe it's, let's just go, we might move on from just doing a Bible story to, well, actually, let me share this worship song with you as well. It really speaks, I think it really might speak to a number of you about how you're feeling at the moment, or whatever it might be. But we start to see more of church taking shape. We might start seeing baptisms. People might decide they want, to take a step of faith, be baptised. We might even share communion together. We start seeing those things take place. Important step at the end here. Do it again. I started off by sharing about how the Anglican Church was very much a pioneering strategy of going out and planting parishes. It was a pioneering strategy. But what happened when there was nowhere else to plant parishes? We sort of entrenched ourselves and we stopped sending out so many people. We lost that ability to pioneer. And so by being intentional of going to do it again, we've learnt by doing it once, what's the next step going to look like? Where's God calling us into the next place? Or maybe it's a group of these people capture the vision and actually go off because I've got a group that they're being called to, which is great. Then we start seeing multiplication, which would be awesome to see. So that's a simple pathway to follow. Happy to spend time with anybody that's wanting to explore pioneering or fresh expressions in your context and work with anybody through that. Don't expect that it will necessarily happen overnight. Sometimes, especially this first section of listening, can be quite a long process. And so there's this balance of not going too fast, but then you don't also want to go so slow that nothing ever happens. And so you just got to really be listening to the Spirit of God in that leading as well. ABCs of starting. I'll just go through this real quick. A, ask another Christian. Who wants to be part of this with me? You don't want to do it alone. Who else has got a similar passion? Maybe it's a home group, maybe it's somebody else in the church, maybe it's somebody from the church down the road. Who else can do this with me? B, begin with what you've got, with who you are, with what you know and what you do. What are your passions? I think Steve spoke about passions this morning. What are you passionate about? And how can you use that to go and start a fresh expression or a new way of doing church or ministry. The second video of Michael in Wildwood, Florida. They said, passions. What are your passions and how can we do something with that? So start with what you've got. C, chat to others. Who else can you talk to that might be able to help input into where you're going? Again, it's that listening, that learning. D, dream. Dream up lots of possibilities, especially if you're not sure where to go. Maybe you're thinking, God's calling me into something new, but I just don't know what to do. Maybe you know that God's calling you to a certain community or neighbourhood or culture, but you don't know what to do with that group. Start dreaming. What if? What if I did this? Or what if we did that? Be creative. Come up with some ideas. Talk them through. See what you come up with. There's no problem with coming up with some dreams and working through them. E, experiment. Don't shy away from trying something new. And I think we often do this in our churches. We don't try enough new stuff. Often we go back to that fear of failure. We don't want to fail. And so, well, I guess we just won't try. So if we don't try, we're not going to fail. And then no one's going to look at me strange. No one's going to blame me. But actually, we need to experiment. Don't shy away from failure. Because even within failure, we find success. You would have learnt something in that process. Okay? And actually, for those of you who don't actually go out and pioneer, support those who do. Encourage them. Help them identify the successes that happen and celebrate with them. F, follow the pathway. That's the one that we just went through, that one there. Follow a pathway. You can tell this is a Fresh Expressions A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And the last one, God. Keep God before you in all that you do. Okay? Keep God before you in all that you do. Right. Now, if you've really failed to get everything that I've said, then hopefully this will help. Is anyone inspired? There is a process in this and a lot of thinking through. And as I say, if anyone in your parishes or as a small group or even as individuals, if you're wanting to think through more of this, I'm happy to talk. I know Steve is probably happy to support you where he can. Find some support. Start imagining and dreaming and see where it takes you.